Hi. Yesterday I did a video, it was a tribute video on the passing of Lemmy Kilmister of the band Motorhead. So, he passed away a few weeks ago at the age of 70. And I got to thinking about another tribute video I wanted to do. Now, this person died about 5 years ago, and I didn't have a device really to do a video about this person at the time. Didn't have a camera or a phone or anything. I did do a blog entry on him, but I always kind of want to do maybe like some sort of a tribute video. And the person I'm talking about is Ronnie James Dio. Now, I think Ronnie James Dio, like Lemmy, was also very influential in metal. I definitely think Ronnie James Dio, as a lot of fans would agree, is one of the best singers of all time. I consider him to be one of the five best singers that there ever was. He could be, he had really a good range. He could sing as, quiet and, as calm as like a folk singer, or he could, make his vocals a lot more angry, harder, more metal sounding. I mean, just had a terrific range to him. And, got to thinking about him, a lot of his music and his legacy. And I did come across a video a couple years ago that someone had did with Dio, and it was pretty long. And they really got into all the bands he was in and all the albums he put out. And he really put out a lot. If you're talking about the career of Ronnie James Dio, there's a lot of stuff he did. I mean, he goes back to almost the beginning of rock and roll, to the 50s, the late 50s, when he was in Ronnie Dio and the Red Caps. And the interesting thing about that is, he formed the band around, where he lived in upstate New York. The band began to gain some popularity. He was actually, and this surprised me, he was actually supposedly a really good trumpet player, and turned down a scholarship to Juilliard because he wanted to sing, and because he was starting to get momentum as a singer with the Red Caps. And some people even saw Dio at around this time. I think it was a little after, when he was in the Prophets, but I know I came across a video of Eric Bloom of the band Blue Oyster Cult, where he said that Dio was always, very professional, even at a young age. And you could even hear, even at a young age, how Dio was developing his, vocal range and sound. Really, definitely could tell it was Dio. But after the Red Caps and the Prophets, Dio then formed the Elves, which I believe came the Electric Elves at one point, and then just Elf. And Elf put out 3 albums, and it was with Elf where he began to really gain some notoriety. They played a number of shows with Deep Purple, which ultimately led to him joining the band Rainbow when Ritchie Blackmore departed Deep Purple. And it was Rainbow where he really started to gain some fame, began to tour around a lot. Rainbow were, kind of big, but not really big. Other bands like Aerosmith and Kiss, I think, kind of overpowered them back in the 70s, and they weren't quite as big. But definitely could probably say that this band, and I would consider it, and even in a documentary I saw on VH1 Classic, they state that, Rainbow would be considered like a proto-metal, a proto-power metal band. I could definitely see where, that was the case, because he was one of the first to really have a lot of fantasy lyrics, and also a lot of sci-fi based lyrics. I mean, you had that stuff in other songs as well, of course, but definitely had it in Rainbow, and the music was, pretty heavy and melodic at the same time. And so, I put out 3 albums with Rainbow, and then, he either quit or fired. I know Ritchie Blackmore didn't feel his vocal styling was, commercial enough and where he wanted the band to go at that time. And then when he left Rainbow, he then became Ozzy Osbourne's replacement in Black Sabbath. And then in 1980, they put out what I consider to be one of the best albums of all time, and that's Heaven and Hell. And Heaven and Hell was definitely kind of like a sort of a rejuvenation album for Black Sabbath in a lot of ways, you know. Like I said, it came out in 1980. AC/DC, coincidentally, actually kind of was going through a somewhat similar situation where, you know, they got a new singer, Brian Johnson, and then they put out, you know, one of their most classic albums, Back in Black. So same thing kind of happened with Sabbath. They put out Heaven and Hell, really revived the band in some ways, although I do love the Ozzy stuff as well. So, but it did kind of take the band in a new direction. Dio's vocals really worked well with Sabbath. And, you know, they toured around. There was a famous Black and Blue tour with Blue Oyster Cult. They then went back in the studio. They recorded Mob Rules. And then after that, they did a live album called Live Evil. Now, it was in the mixing of Live Evil where things didn't go so well, and there was somewhat of a little bit of a conflict between Tony Iommi and Ronnie James Dio, and fortunately Ronnie James Dio ended up leaving Sabbath, which was a shame. But then he did form his, you know, solo project and put out some classic albums there as well, such as, you know, Holy Diver, you know, yet Holy Diver, Last in Line. One of what I think is probably one of the more underrated ones, I think, would be Dream Evil. You know, that was a great album. And like I said, definitely an underrated one at that. And then, you know, he toured around. He rejoined Sabbath back in 1992, and they put out Dehumanizer. Dehumanizer was also a great album. Then there was a little bit of a dispute. He ended up leaving, put out some more solo albums, and then later returned to Black Sabbath. I want to say it was around 2004 or 5. I'm not sure the exact date, but they renamed the band Heaven and Hell, which is essentially Dio Sabbath. They then toured. This is when I got a chance, you know, to see Dio, which definitely very grateful for. You know, definitely had a chance to see him when they toured with Megadeth, actually, was the opening band. Machine Head, Megadeth, and then, you know, Heaven and Hell. So then, you know, continued with Heaven and Hell. Then Dio was diagnosed with cancer, and then shortly after that, you know, he had passed at the age of 67. This would have been 2010. So, you know, it's just some things I wanted to say about Dio. Definitely a big fan. He's been in the music scene for a long time, you know, very influential, very interesting guy, definitely an intellectual guy. Read a lot. You know, he had like a huge, I think it was kind of like a library that he had in his house, I believe. Some of his songs, you know, dealt with like religious themes. Although he said that, you know, religious, in terms of religion, it's kind of, his religious beliefs are kind of like that of Bill Maher. You know, he's sort of that kind of person. But, yeah, that's, you know, all I have to say. Just definitely wanted to do a tribute on Dio, because, like I said, I am a fan. And, you know, hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good day.